Welcome, everybody, to the Skeptic Hangout, the place where we sit back, relax, and chit chat about intriguing and sometimes controversial topics through the lens of skepticism. I'm one of your hosts, Laura from Unapologetically Me, and I have with me once again my partner in crime, Richard from the Yorkshire Atheist. And we have back with us this week special guest, Kelley Laughlin. He's an ACD volunteer extraordinaire. So check him out. In fact, he pretty much runs the place. So he's kind
No,
of a
not at
big
all.
deal.
Not at all. Not at all.
This week, we are discussing indoctrination. So grab your English tea or your Venti Breve double chocolate peppermint mocha with whip. Go on. Just do it. You know you want to. You really, really want to. Everyone's doing it. This is episode 46, Indoctrination. Okay, so there are 1.5 million places that we could take this conversation, and I don't have any clue where to start. So, Kelley, you had mentioned before we started, just talking about like your own indoctrination stories and how you have two of them. Why don't we start with just some of our stories of different ways in which we've been indoctrinated?
Well, I was indoctrinated into the Christian faith, of course, when I was young. And it was easy because I was young and I didn't have any life experience or any much empirical knowledge. And yeah, I mean, I was pretty convinced that Jesus loved me because the Bible told me so. I mean, they taught me the song, so I was pretty convinced that that was the truth because these were adults that I trusted that were telling me this. So I was easily indoctrinated that time. The second time I got indoctrinated, I think I got indoctrinated more because it was something that I wanted to be true. Not so much that I was being told it was true, but it was something I wanted to be true. And I was looking for alternative ways to look at the world at that point as well.
Mhm.
So I was looking at alternative facts, right? And of course, having an open mind doesn't mean looking at alternative facts. It's actually thinking about what your beliefs are, and maybe your beliefs aren't true, at least in my definition of it. So I became indoctrinated a second time and it was my own fault. I don't think it was my fault the first time, but it was my fault the second time. So I think there's at least two different ways to be indoctrinated.
Mhm. You hit the nail on the head when you say like it was my fault the second time. A lot of times, I think very commonly indoctrination happens without us even knowing it. But how often do we go into something wanting it to be true and it's a form of self-indoctrination? Like I know both of my religious experiences was self-indoctrination, something that I wanted to be true because at the time it served a purpose in my life.
That
Um,
whole wanting it to be true sort of allows you to overlook some of the things that you would analyze in a critical sort of way, and sort of keeps you going, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, think about like how people of one particular religion look at other people of all the other different religions. Like, oh, what you believe is crazy and oh, that's wooey and that's clearly wrong and it's so obviously bull, right? But then they look at their own religion and it's like, but this one's the truth,
Yes,
right?
right, right,
So,
right.
yeah, yeah, you talk about the whole wanting it to be true. I sometimes feel in terms of indoctrination specifically, but maybe just in beliefs more broadly, that a lot of it is wishful thinking, but then there's indoctrination that's not so comforting, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
indoctrination that scares us or gets us fired up or gets us to act in a certain way. So that I hope we get into later too. But Gil, what about your indoctrination experiences?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of I've spoken about my early sort of journey towards Christianity before, but just sort of briefly, because I wasn't born into a Christian family. I was born to parents who were previously practicing Christians. And we started going to church again when I was about 7. I went to a church school, so my junior school was a church school. So I linked to this church. I was involved in the Boys Brigade, so like a Boy Scout style thing, but very heavenly Christian
Mhm.
focused. And sort of even just at the beginning of this episode, I was sort of reflecting on my own indoctrination in terms of that. And obviously there's the big part like you were saying, Kelley, in terms of not having the faculties in order to analyze things that you've been told in any sort of meaningful way. But there's also, when I think about it in my own experience, part of the method of indoctrination, I guess, was the fact that I was made to feel like I was making the choice. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So like the process in the Church of England, at least, in terms of sort of becoming like a proper full member of the church or what have you, is that usually people are baptized as an infant, so promises are made on their behalf. I wasn't baptized as an infant. I chose to be baptized when I was 7. But then there's a period of, where people are prepared for confirmation, where you were baptized as an infant, but now you're stepping into the sort of role of being a full member of the church, and you make these promises. You go to confirmation classes where you analyze critically, in inverted commas, sort of, Bible stories and messages that are being portrayed. I'll chuck in here as well my usual etymology of indoctrination, in terms of it's where you get sort of thrown into a doctrine, and a doctrine is obviously like a belief that is held by a group, or it can even be like political parties have doctrines and whatever, but certainly churches do, religious organizations do. So where I really felt like I was choosing the doctrines and the beliefs and things for myself, it wasn't something that was being forced upon me. It was something that I came to as a decision on my own free will. We're encouraged to ask questions, but obviously the questions that we're encouraged to ask were on the sort of, I don't know, when you don't have all the information you need in order to ask the right questions, but we're
You don't know which questions to ask.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I've been thankful, and I've said this before as well, in terms of the indoctrination that I had was a very, well, it didn't lead me to have nightmares about hell. It didn't lead me to have, an eternal sense of dread for this God figure. The Church of England's version of Christianity is quite nice and handholdy, quite painless in a lot of ways. And so, it's not left me with any deep scars inside, which, that sort of process has with a lot of people. But still, the process out of it was a big deal. I've taught for a long time and I haven't come to a conclusion, but that's nothing new.
No, but I like hearing your story, that because for some reason, I knew that you had come into Christianity and then back out of it, but I had forgotten that you weren't born into it, that your family had come back to
because
Christianity.
my parents were never massive believing Christians, up and they are now, but I think they were both. They had gone through the whole sort of, they went to church schools, and Christianity was kind of the default in the 50s, 60s, 70s, obviously on the decline, but that sort of latent background kind of default Christianity was theirs. And it was, I guess it was my fault really, because I wanted to go to the Boys Brigade meeting. But yeah, I think their sort of that latent background indoctrination from their childhood sort of then sprang into action in terms of this is a thing, this is right, and let's encourage this sort of pathway forward. But I never felt like any of it was malicious, or I've no reason to believe that the people in the church were trying to lead me down the wrong. It was heartfelt beliefs. Everyone's hearts were in completely the right place, which again I know isn't the case for everybody, with all sorts. There are certain types of indoctrination which are incredibly harmful and terrible, not just religious ones either.
Yeah, one thing you mentioned was wanting to join the Boys Brigade, and I found that interesting because it was almost like they were dangling a carrot in front of you and getting you to come, And I remember once a small parade in my town going by, and they had a float came by from one of the local churches, and it was all drawn up like Noah's Ark with a bunch of kids, and they were all happy and having fun. And my 6-year-old daughter was with me, and she was like, "Oh, that looks like a lot of fun. I would like to go there maybe." And I was like, "If you want to go, I'll take you. And that's where you go to learn about Jesus." And she went, "Oh, that's okay. I don't want to go." And that was probably my proudest day as an atheist.
That is so cute.
That brings up a really interesting point, though, in terms of I often fear as a parent myself. I've got 3 young boys from 2 to 10. We've spoken about on our parenting episode not so long ago in terms of that fear that, I don't want to indoctrinate my children against certain ideas because that's the conclusions I've come to. Right. And it's that fine line, isn't it, between indoctrinating against and just trying to sort of encourage skepticism and open-mindedness to the right sorts of ideas and questions.
Right. I was totally willing to bring her if she wanted to go. I wanted to have wanted her to have that experience, And I actually took both my kids to a Unitarian Universalist church, which isn't really a church, sort of, but to give them an idea of what church is like. So, but neither one of them became religious. And I don't know. They both had religious mothers, but not me. So.
Well, and it's interesting how presenting religion to kids in a more factual way can sort of arm them against it in a way. Like, so my kids, both times I went through religion, I presented it to the kids as, well, this is what mommy believes, and a lot of people don't believe it, and you can come and you can learn about it, and like clearly you have to go to Sunday school because who's going to watch my kids while I'm in church, right? So they did go to Sunday school and they did their little arts and crafts and they sang songs and stuff. But it was never really something that I pushed on them. And then coming out of religion was super duper duper easy for them. But they now view both Christian and Muslim religious ideas as no different from like Roman and Greek mythology. Like they're just stories. And there's not this like special up on a pedestal with this kind of belief, but this other kind of belief belongs over here in Storybookville. They just see it all as the same. And I think it's because of that, sort of allowed to be open-minded, not really having it shoved down their throats, able to see it from an outside perspective rather than immersing them in it, I think is really actually, without even my effort, because I didn't deliberately go into Christianity not wanting them to be Christians, but not wanting to shove it down their throat, I think it really helped them to see it more objectively.
There is one area of my life as a parent, though, where I very specifically and actively indoctrinate my children, and that is in their love of Doctor Who. My 10-year-old have been very successful in that indoctrination. My 2 and 5-year-olds, I'm getting there, but it's a very important aspect of my life.
My youngest, his favorite knock knock joke is like, knock knock, who's there? Doctor Who. Exactly.
Yes. I'm going to go do that to my son after this is over.
It's so funny. My kids would fit right in your household, Gill.
Yes. Very welcome to pop over from Nevada.
Okay, so we've been talking sort of vaguely around indoctrination, but there really is a lot to it, like you both have alluded to. There's indoctrination that can be relatively harmless. There's indoctrination that can be very, very harmful, and like everything in between. And there's a lot of ways of doing it. One of the things that I want to talk about is in our culture, how indoctrination can sneak up on us. I mean, I think we would all argue that whatever religious adventures we went through, we didn't feel at the time like we were being indoctrinated, right? Like we felt at the time that we were being given an opportunity, or we were learning something, or discovering something about ourselves, right? But not necessarily like, oh, I'm going to indoctrinate myself into this lifestyle or belief system. But I see it a lot with politics and nationalism, not just in the United States, but just in general. We're indoctrinated into these ideas of what our country is, or what our culture is, or what our holidays should be. So let's talk a little bit about that, like the ways in which indoctrination can really creep up.
It's interesting things like we've talked a lot about like conspiracy theories and stuff, and especially to do with like COVID and all of that lot, and how we can see lots of people who have got bad ideas about stuff, and it's easy to keep those ideas alive. But something that can be shoved back at people who do trust in the science and whatever is that we're just being indoctrinated into another set of ideas. We're indoctrinated into thinking that scientists can understand the truth about things, or indoctrinated into the efficacy of vaccines or whatever else. And I guess it's hard, kind of what you were saying, Laura, in terms of we never felt like we were being indoctrinated. it's that question all the time of like, well, what have I been indoctrinated into that I don't necessarily realize? Do I believe things now that aren't, you know, necessarily the best things to believe because of indoctrination that I was just unaware of, be it in society at large or be it, you know, within family or what have you. Yeah, difficult to know.
That's the whole idea of having an open mind, to me, is going back and reflecting on the things that I believe and re-examining why I believe them. Right? It's not, to me, it's not just believing in an alternative facts like it is to a lot of people. So I think it's really important to explore what you believe all the time and what you're about to, and what you're learning too. And understand your motives for it and look for empirical evidence for what you're getting into.
I really like how you say being open-minded means being able to examine your own beliefs, because I didn't always used to think that. I thought that being open-minded meant being able to take in information um, without judgment, right? And
Mm-hmm.
not closing yourself off to any one particular belief. So like, oh, I'm deciding in advance that this is wrong, so I'm closed-minded. Oh, I'm giving it a chance, so now I'm open-minded. And that's actually not necessarily correct,
Because
because
some things don't deserve that chance.
exactly, yeah, there are some things
Mm-hmm.
that you can remain open-minded but have the cognitive ability to say, yes, but that information is not worthy of my time or attention. And so I really like how you say that, because open-minded, now that I'm an atheist, is more about being able to challenge any belief I hold, and being able to hold my beliefs a lot more loosely, or be willing to have my beliefs criticized. Like if someone
Mm-hmm.
says, well, I think this is wrong and here's why, being able to look at it and say, well, are they right? Because if they're right, I want to change my mind. And I think that's a really big distinction to make with open-mindedness. And um,
It,
and I
it
think,
gets it gets difficult when they can't show you, though.
yeah,
You know, and that's when you really have to use better thinking, I think. You
mhm.
know, when people talk about morality, well, we don't have empirical evidence for what morality is. So it's really important. A lot of people that keep open minds about it, but the people who have a closed mind about morality don't understand that they're not right. They just have an opinion, and that the other person who they think is wrong has an opinion too. And a lot of, I don't know if you know what Loki's wager is, but I invoke Loki's wager in a lot of those arguments. It's the idea that if we can't define the parameters unambiguously, then we're never going to come to a resolution. So it's not worth arguing about, honestly.
I've
That's
not heard that, and I
interesting.
like it.
I'm curious how you invoke that. If you say that we should or should not argue about morality.
I think we should. I
Yeah.
think we should argue about it. I just don't think we're ever going to come to a resolution.
I think what it comes down to, bottom line, I know we're getting off on a little bit of a tangent, but I think it comes down to compromise in the end. So when we can define at least what our goal is, then we can start making some moral judgments based off of that goal. But as
Mhm.
long as our goal is nebulous, then I don't think we can ever come to any sort of conclusions. But I think what is dangerous is when we come to a conclusion for a period of time and decide like, well, that's it, right? Like, oh, we've decided that, say, killing babies is bad, right? So then now it gets to the point where we're never ever going to examine, well, why is it? Let's re-examine it, and reaffirm it. Or if we can't reaffirm it, then let's change our perspective on it and change our morality about it.
And let's
Um,
write that baby barbecue recipe book then.
right, right, exactly. And I'm not saying it's good to kill babies. I am not making that claim.
So
What I'm
in
saying is,
conclusion,
yeah, in conclusion, Laura's a baby eater. No, what I'm trying to say is, you have these things that to us would be very, very obviously bad, right? Well, why? Like once we've determined it's bad, that doesn't mean we don't reflect on it or think about it or challenge it. It needs to be kind of consistently reapproached, and the whys need to be defined. But I agree with you. I think morality is one of those things that, because there's no one size fits all, there's always going to be a morality in which somehow, somewhere, someone loses out, or it's not exactly even.
And a lot of our moralities are indoctrinated into us by our families, right? Or our
Yeah.
society. So
I
going
want to sort of explore that a little bit more after our commercial break, if that's okay with you too.
Thank you
Cool.
for keeping us on time. Yeah, off to commercial. Okay, so what have we got coming up this week? Gilliver is once again not with us. Obviously we recorded this during the time where he had just lost his mom to COVID, so he is dealing with that right now with his family members. So we don't have any news on up and coming shows. He hasn't given me anything that he's doing this week, and I'm not doing anything. So it's going to be a pretty quick commercial break, but I want to give the majority of it once again to Kelley. So
Agree.
I know you told everybody last week what you've got going on, but just in case someone was crazy enough to miss last week's episode, tell us about what you've got going on.
I do. I have a website, kellyskaleidoscope.com. I run a group on Facebook called What Is My Rock, where I identify rocks for people. My last name's Kelley Laughlin. You can friend me on Facebook. You're more than welcome to. I've been doxxed for years, so I don't care. I also work on the ACD as a moderator, and I run a couple of shows there. One called Meet the ACA, where I interview cast and crew members of the ACA shows. And on Sunday nights, I do another show called Speak Your Truth. I'm not usually hosting it. I will often co-host it, but we have a person on with a particular topic, and we discuss that topic and let the audience come up and get on a soapbox. It's almost like a call-in show, only on Discord. This weekend, for example, we have somebody coming on talking about being a Black atheist. And I think the next week we're going to have atheism and the intersection of atheism and sexuality, I think, is the topic for the next week. So we get some pretty good topics.
That's cool. Yeah, I need to be there for those.
I'm going to say your eyes lit up then, Laura.
I know. Well, because that's one of those things. I think that, okay, I'm going to get up on my high horse really quick during this commercial break and go way off topic. But I really think that there are a couple of things that religion and indoctrination in general have taken hostage, and one of them is our sexuality. And I'm very, very passionate about that. I don't know why I'm specifically passionate about that. Like, I'm not like a big sex fiend or anything. I appreciate it as much as the next person.
That's not what I've heard.
Well, that's for our special guests. We'll have that talk later. No, but I don't know why. I really think that it does a lot of harm to take people's sexualities and enslave them with them. So yeah, I think that'd be a great conversation to have.
That is definitely one of the ways we get harmed by indoctrination. That it can cause us physical harm too. Look what's going on with COVID deniers right now, because those people are indoctrinated also, right? Yeah. And it's causing them physical harm. So,
and it's causing the people around them physical harm too.
Yes, I was just going to say that it's causing our society harm too. It's causing everybody harm. So yeah.
Yeah. So everybody check out the Discord channel. If we'll have all of the links in the description. But you can always also find us on our Facebook page and then get connected that way if you can't find it or can't figure it out. But leading into sorry, like I get kind of like my head gets ahead of my talking sometimes, or my talking gets ahead of my head. I'm not sure. But
it's definitely the talking getting ahead of the head.
Yeah, lips are moving, brain's not thinking. So yeah, what I was trying to do was pass the buck off to Gill to talk about our Facebook page.
Yeah, so after you've gone on literally every one of Kelley's links and groups and chats and everything, all of them top to bottom, then you can wander over to our Facebook group where we can have some discussions about some of the stuff we've been talking today, especially if people have got any sort of, stories of indoctrination or things they want to ask people about or what have you. You can find the link to that and to our merch store and all the other platforms then that you can get our show on our Linktree, which is linktree/Skeptic Hangout. So do that now. No, don't do that now. Watch the rest of the show, then do Kelley stuff, and then do that.
Or you do what you want, boo. Just
no.
do your as long as you come back and finish our show.
Yeah, let's do that.
All right, back to the show. Okay, so before the commercial break, I don't honestly remember what it was that we were going to transition to. So if either
it was something really interesting that Kelley was saying. Can you remember?
I think it was how indoctrination can hurt you.
All right, so let's do that. So welcome back from commercial break. Before the show, we were talking about the ways in which indoctrination can be harmful. So let's get into that just a little bit. and talk about because obviously indoctrination can have its positive benefits. It's the way that cultures can make a cohesive, coherent culture.
Mhm.
So there's a degree of indoctrination that's kind of necessary to have these really uber large societies. But there's also a lot of ways in which it's harmful. So let's get into that discussion.
It's hard as well to know the difference often if you're not necessarily investigating every sort of possible iteration of what you're talking about or every possible sort of outcome of it. So, like we were talking about morality a bit ago, and I think it's really easy to just, especially I know we've talked about parenting quite a lot, but indoctrination in children is a big sort of thing that happens. I indoctrinate my children to make sure they stay on the pavement when they're walking down the street, or make sure on sidewalk, whatever you want to say, or make sure they, stop, look, listen for traffic as they're crossing over a road. That's something I drill into them as soon as they're able to understand words that come out of my mouth. And there are other things which sort of go down the avenue of morality, where it's like, you offhand, obviously earlier on, Laura said about killing babies as being a bad thing. And it's one of those things that sounds really obviously bad, because it obviously is.
Mm-hmm.
But it did make me think of that question of like, why? So, why is that bad? And why do I automatically think of that as a bad thing?
Right.
I'm just going to make it clear that I do think it is a bad thing, like legitimately. But like, what is it that makes that bad? Like, have I ever come to the conclusion that that's bad because I've thought through the ramifications of it, or is it just one of those things where I was indoctrinated to know that killing babies is bad? I mean, I don't think my mum and dad ever sat me down to say, Richard, just to let you know, killing babies is a bad idea. But just through sort of how I was brought up and cultural, societal norms and what have you, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
Silence.
Go ahead, Laura.
No, it's funny when I think somebody else is going to talk, I get quiet, and then there's always like awkward silences. So you can go ahead if you have something to say.
I was going to say that we do need that little bit of indoctrination to get us through on a society, as you were saying. I mean, we're all indoctrinated that the law is a good thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a good example. And you do bring up a good point, Richard, that a lot of the things that we indoctrinate ourselves in, like the belief that killing babies is bad, I don't think anybody ever taught me that. I think I indoctrinated myself into that. And that goes back into those two forms of indoctrination that we were talking about, that about somebody, the external and the internal indoctrinations. And I find that fascinating, how we indoctrinate ourselves. I think it's a really fascinating subject, and one that we should be way more aware of that we're doing to ourselves than most people are.
It's that thing as well of like, so we were talking in the commercials about sexuality and things, and people who were indoctrinated as children into believing, just for example, that homosexuality is bad, is immoral, is something that isn't right in society, could then just go on indoctrinating their children and their children into thinking the same things without ever sort of analysing it, understanding the reasons why and wherefore and what have you. And it is that thing, obviously, thinking skeptically in terms of, if we are just mindlessly, thoughtlessly indoctrinating children into thinking certain things, which we feel are just obviously right or wrong, that there's always that element of us having to investigate ourselves in terms of, why is this a viewpoint that I hold? Why is this a position I'm willing to sort of stand and die on this hill on? Is this something that's important, or do I need to change my mind about that?
So this is interesting. Oh, go ahead.
Especially with our children. I know that after my children were born, I really started examining my own ideas better, because I wanted to teach my children better. So that's a good point. That we do indoctrinate our children, and we have to be careful about what we are teaching them.
I like that because at the beginning of this segment after commercial break, we had talked about how we were going to talk about the bad sides of indoctrination, and actually we kind of segued sort of naturally into just talking about how indoctrination occurs, and the ways in which we can challenge our various ways we've been indoctrinated. And I almost think that's a more intriguing topic, because honestly, like the where indoctrination is bad is somewhat obvious, right? It's where it starts to cause somebody harm or where they don't challenge a belief that might be incorrect or damaging. And I think we kind of like pound that into the ground pretty much every episode. So this is even more intriguing to me. The idea that like we are raised a certain way to believe certain things, and we don't always know the difference between just being taught or educated about something or socially conditioned towards something. Like, don't cross the road when there's a car coming. I don't necessarily see that as indoctrination. I see that more as conditioning, right?
Mm.
But then that begs a question: the difference between indoctrinating into a belief and conditioning someone into like, well, this is how you're going to survive within this cultural sort of environment, or just the natural environment, like burning, like touching the burning stove will hurt you, right?
Right.
Um, so there's a you would think it'd be black and white, but it's not. There's a lot of gray area between just teaching somebody about how to live and be safe and healthy and indoctrinating them into a belief.
Right. Is conditioning a tool of indoctrination?
I would say most definitely, right? So
Right. So
yeah.
that would to me would be the difference, that you can use conditioning to indoctrinate. Right.
Yeah, yeah, and it could also be used for other things, like conditioning towards, like, a reaction without thinking about it, right? Like, you condition yourself to look both ways before you cross the road, as Gill said, or, like, my example of the hot stove, right? So
Hmm.
conditioning is just teaching your brain or your body to react a certain way. It doesn't necessarily have a belief or a doctrine attached to it, but then conversely, when you want to get someone to buy into a doctrine or to indoctrinate them, there's a degree of conditioning that is used in order to
Conditioning
make that
someone
happen.
to not choose a film where there are gay characters in it, or conditioning someone to look away, or give side eye to a gay couple walking down the street holding hands, or it's those things which, and again, the people who are conditioning people to think like that don't necessarily think of themselves as doing the wrong thing to that. It is that fine line.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think where it becomes indoctrination is where you attach some sort of explanation or belief or teaching to it that is separate from the action itself, right? Like it's easy to say, like, okay, this is how you walk, or this is how you do a cartwheel, right? Or a push up, and we're going to condition your body to do these physical movements, right? And there's not really anything attached to it other than you need to train your muscles to do this thing in order to do this thing. But when you start attaching like what you were saying, you should feel a certain way toward gay people because gay people are morally bad for whatever reason, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't occur naturally. Like babies and children don't naturally hate people who have a different color than them or sexuality than them or behavior or mannerism than them. They're taught to not
Hmm.
like those things. And so you're right. There's a degree of conditioning that makes you feel a certain way towards someone that you wouldn't naturally feel.
Here's
And
an example of that. So like,
yeah.
sort of around where I grew up, there's an area sort of a couple of minutes away from where I lived, where there was a very large Indian and Pakistani heritage sort of population.
Mhm.
And I remember very, very, very vividly, every time we drove up through those streets, my dad would lock the doors of the car. And it's something like that, which is very, very small. He never said anything attached to that action. But I remember every time we went up towards those streets, the doors of the car would be locked. And that sent a very clear message to me in terms of conditioning towards, the people who I saw around, the sorts of shops and houses that we saw around. And obviously I'm not in a position where I hold negative, views or opinions towards that group of people, but it's really easy to just carry that on. Like, I still sometimes have that thought in my mind of, do I need to lock the doors of the car now? And that's a crazy thing for me to think, but it's all come from that initial sort of
It's
conditioning. Like,
programmed. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, it's programmed. Yep. And that was why I wanted to be why I started re-examining what I thought and how I acted when I had my kids, because I didn't want to teach my bad habits to my children. Right.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. So we're coming up to the end of the show. We have about 3.5 minutes left. So I just want to throw out really quick, and then I want you two to have the last two words, especially you, Kelley, as our special guest. But I just want to reiterate that what I liked the most about this show was what Kelley had to say with I think it's actually the key against indoctrination is to just really evaluate every belief you hold. Whether it's a political belief, whether it's which football team is best, whether it's a belief about the natural world, just to be able to challenge it and question it and look into it. I think that right there is at least one of the best ways, if not the best way, to combat bad indoctrination. Having said that, I want to pass it on to you guys. Maybe first, Gill, and then Kelley. I want you to finish up for us.
One tool that I found has been really helpful in the indoctrination of my children towards Doctor Who has been there's a set of Mr. Men books where each of the books in the set is one of the Doctors from the 1st to the 13th, like a really nice child-friendly way to engage certainly younger children. So I'd recommend that to anyone who's wanting to go down that specific indoctrination path.
All right, Kelley, now turn everything he just said on its head.
I'm just going to say that, yeah, try to keep an open mind, re-examine everything you believe in. Even if you go back to believing that same thing, at least look at it from a different point of view than you've looked at it through your whole life. And if nothing else, you might get a better understanding of why you believe it and why it's true, even if, or if it's not true, right? I think it's really important to do that, to really examine everything you believe. It's one of the things that has made my life richer, more wonderful, and has given me greater understanding of where I am in life. So I really encourage everybody to examine everything they believe.
Good advice. I second that.
Agreed.
Well, Kelley, here's the thing. I'm like super stoked that you were on this episode, but I just got to tell the audience, like we picked you for rocks because we knew that was your thing. And indoctrination just sort of happened to be the next topic on our list. So it was really quite arbitrary and random that was the next topic. But I think it was freaking perfect. Like I couldn't have imagined a better guest to have on to discuss this topic. And I think that you were a really valuable voice in this
Well,
episode.
Thank you very much. I
yeah.
feel honored. I really do. Thank you so much.
No, I feel like we're honored to any one of our guests. I feel honored because we're just a couple people sitting around talking, and the fact that people want to talk with us to me is like mind blowing.
Yeah.
So
I'm always surprised when people listen to what I say. I always use this AFOD Bebo Brox line. I'm just some guy.
We're all just some people. Yeah. so yeah, I appreciate the time we got to chit chat, and I hope we get to do more in the future. I'm definitely looking forward to your show tomorrow, which we forgot to shill and now don't have time. So everybody get on ACD ASAP and check out our Facebook page because we'll advertise it there. In the meantime, since we have less than a minute before we're going to get cut off, thank you guys, everybody, for listening, and we will catch you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.